Welcome, everyone. I have the distinct pleasure and privilege of being the director of the New Hampshire Lottery. Have been that way for about 8 years now. I have been told I'm functionally insane, and I apologize for that. So I tell lots of jokes. I'm kind of a wise ass. I apologize ahead of time, which is remarkable given the topic at hand in terms of blockchain. And the panelists we have with us here today will speak to you about blockchain technology and its applications for lottery and government in general. Remarkably talented folks, and you have the dumb lawyer as the moderator. So I apologize for any mistakes I may make going forward. First, let me introduce the first speaker, Dr. Leah Meyer. She's director of, it sucks to get old, it really does. Polaris Strategic Foresight. She's a specialist in performance and public management. She has a number of writings, and I love this book. The Influence of the Regulatory Environment, the Example of the Sports Betting and Lottery Sectors. Please welcome Dr. Leah Meyer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be back at the World Lottery Summit. The last time I was in Singapore presenting exactly the influence of the regulatory environment on the sport betting and lottery business. Since then, I concentrated a lot about new technologies and their impact on actually this political administrative system we are all working in. Today, I will talk about how how new technology actually challenge the regulatory environment we are all operating in, and what we have to think about if we are reflecting on blockchain and other technologies. Because everything that is challenging a regulation is a source of tension. Regulation, and we are all have to live with it, and we are living with them and arranging with the gambling regulation we have, is not something that will easily be adapted and modified to new technologies. And our market, it is a technology-driven market, and technologies are at the core of the lottery business. And that's why it is really important to think about the regulatory environment we are acting in. We saw it all. It started with the internet or with video lottery terminals, which emerged and which were posing questions in the regulatory market on how actually are we allowed to use them in regulation. In Switzerland, this was a huge challenge for the operator to actually introduce these terminals and to make them accepted by the regulator. It then moved forward to the internet, which is also a technology that had to be integrated in the gambling environment, because we all remember the first scratch tickets that were still on paper. And especially in Switzerland, where the lottery law dates back still today on 1923, it was a huge challenge to integrate actually this the internet as a new technology in this gambling environment. So it is really crucial to think about the functioning of the political administrative system when talking about technologies. What does that mean for our gambling regulation, these new technologies? And that's what I want to give some reflections on, and especially on the example of the blockchain. We heard it all, and we heard it also this morning. Blockchain has a huge potential for us. It can decrease transaction costs. It can increase transparency and create trust. These are all values that for us in the lottery business are very crucial. And these are all values that we are building up, we are safeguarding, and we try also to defend sometimes towards other operators in this market. So it may have a huge opportunity to us, but it also may have some risks. And that's what I want to talk about now. We have first to reflect on what is actually a gambling regulation. And across all jurisdictions, we can identify some basic elements that all these regulations share. And the first one is that it's always national state regulation. We do not have an international gambling regulation, and I can assure you there is not one waiting around the corner for us. Even on the European Union level, it is acknowledged that gambling is a national matter, and we will not have a common regulatory framework. Further, gambling regulation is a descriptive regulation. It is a command and control regulation. That means that the regulatory intensity is high, and it is sector-specific. This is a challenge to new technologies because they are actually coming from the side towards this regulatory setting, and we need to think about how these new technologies will be included and adapted or can be included, and whether gambling regulation has to be adapted. First and third, the common element we all share in our regulation is the consumer protection regulation. We are not in an economic business as other businesses. We have to safeguard the consumer interest, and we are in a business that may create a certain harm. And that's the main reason we are surrounded with the gambling regulation. And you can see why that will create this tension with new technologies, because new technologies are not bound to boundaries. They challenge them. They come internationally. They do not stop in front of Switzerland. They will cross borders, and that is a challenge for the gambling regulation and gambling regulators. This was also the case with the internet. We are 6 weeks away in Switzerland that a new gambling law is adopted. It was adopted. It will enter into force the 1st of January 2019. And still for the next 6 weeks, casino gambling over the internet is forbidden in Switzerland. That may surprise you, because internet is an accepted technology today. But from the gambling regulation point of view, for the casino sector in Switzerland, it is still forbidden, and that is written in the law. And now we are already talking about the second area of internet, while on the legislative side, we are still dealing with this first area of the internet. And that's this tension we have to address, and where as an operator we have an important role to play. And I can assure you that in the parliamentary discussions we had about the new gambling law, nobody talked about blockchain and future technologies. So it is an open question how we can integrate them. And I want to give you some insights how we should address this question. But in order to do that, we have to understand the gambling regulation and how it actually works. And what you see here is the fundamental model how a public policy is created, and it actually has two levels. It has the level of the policy, the politics, and the level of the public action. Any regulation is created because you will have a problem in society, which in the state, some actors think that there is a political problem that has to be addressed. They will then adopt a law, take measures in order to create or resolve that problem. This intention, this political intention, has to be translated in the public action, and it will result in regulatory directives, in rules that we all have to follow. And in our case, it is especially the regulator who is the gatekeeper of this translation. And that is very important to keep in mind, because with the new technologies, they do not follow this top-bottom approach. They do not respect that first we have the political level that will set boundaries, will create an environment, and then we will translate it into a public action. New technologies, they come transversally. They come from the side. They embed all sectors across all public policies, and the government and the administration has to create a response for that. And this creates opportunities and risks. And I can assure you that the regulation will not go away. Gambling regulation will not disappear. And when we talk about blockchain, or today when we think about the blockchain and also the hype of the blockchain that creates at the moment, it starts from these premises that there is no regulation in place. But the gambling regulation, the financial market regulation, they have to, the blockchain can only be used in the frame of that regulation. So if you want to address the question of the blockchain and evaluate whether you want to use it in your sector and the way you want to use it, you have to think it in the environment of your gambling regulation. And blockchain especially is very interesting because it has the potential to increase transparency. It can be used for monitoring gambling behavior. And also, for example, in all the anti-money laundering legislation which is coming, which we have also to respect under the frame of the gambling regulation, it can give a huge opportunity. In Switzerland, for example, from the 1st January 2019 onward, and there are other legislations who has the same, we are also under the anti-money laundering. And from the 1st January onward, we have to take plenty of measures in identifying, verifying not only the players, but also the person who have the economic rights of the assets that are played from a certain value onward. This is a challenge for a lottery operator because it has to adapt its internal systems in regard to this new regulation. And for example, the blockchain could be a good opportunity to stock information, to share information, to follow up information, and also to share it possibly with a regulator. But you have others. You can think about the blockchain in the way of player identification, about verifying the gambling behavior, where you could follow and register these elements on the blockchain. On the other hand, the blockchain technology may also have a risk. And we saw it this morning that we have, in the gambling regulation, we have the obligation to know our customers. We have to identify players when they play online. We cannot not know who the players are. And the blockchain, when we talk about the public blockchains, they are all based on pseudonyms. And that is a challenge we would need to address if you want to go in this blockchain area. And that's why you also have to think hard about this, of these lottery businesses that are on a blockchain. And they are some that are now under a licensed regime, which we heard also this morning, but others are not. And we, as authorized lottery operators, have to think how we will address these challenges. In Switzerland, for example, it is quite sure that under the new gambling regulation, which allows us now to, where the regulator will block internet sites, it will for surely also block the internet sites which are based on a blockchain. Whether it is effective or not, that is another question. But these are things you have to think about. What is very clear is that there is the risk of an unlevel playing field that comes up also with the blockchain, and we had that also with the internet. For years, you had an authorized offer and a non-authorized offer, and the non-authorized offer did not have to pay taxes, it did not finance charitable projects or contribute to the state budget, and it was had another game offer that was more responsible, that had to give an answer to the gambling addiction problem, etc. On the other side, you had the non-authorized offer, which were, because they were not under this state legal regulation, they were able to have other kind of games, more attractive games, etc. And with the blockchain, this unlevel playing field will come and show up again. But this time it is very important that, because we know about the internet and how it developed, that we can take actions early and we can position ourselves in a better way. And it can give opportunities, but we also have to consider the challenges it may pose. What does that mean for us? If you think about addressing the question of blockchain, you have to first think, or you have to know your gambling regulation. You have to know what you can do under your current gambling regulation. Can you use a blockchain under your regulation? What can you do with that blockchain? Can you follow up players on the blockchain or not? Is it a technology that will be allowed by your regulator? And the regulator today may not even know that, because one problem we have in this relationship between an operator and a regulator is asymmetric information. You know more about your market than the regulator. You are ahead of your regulator. This is very important, but in cases where you have to have an active regulator, it is very important that you share the information with it and that you also show the opportunities that are given by a new technology. The way you do that is to know the purpose of your regulation, because you have to align the purpose of your regulation with the purpose of why you are using this new technology. And then you can go and also sell it to your regulator, which is crucial in that relationship, because regulation will not go away. There are studies that shows that we are actually having more and more regulation, and gambling regulation is one where it is an utopic view, in my perspective, to talk about an international gambling regulation or about no gambling regulation. That will not happen. Blockchain is something that governments are interested in. And so that is an important point to consider when thinking about your regulator. Because in Switzerland, we have many blockchain-based initiatives in government. We have even laws that are passed now where they will build registers on a blockchain. And governments realize that in order to become a real digital economy, you have to collaborate with the private entities or para-public actors, as we are as well. Even so, the lottery and the gambling is not the first public policy that they have in mind. It's still one where we can react and where we have to show initiative. And then learn from the past. Don't repeat what we did or the pace we reacted before to technology. But if you make your analysis and you want to adopt with a blockchain and you actually see that you need to address this question on the political level, it may need more time, which is a very important fact to consider. And it's better to act now than yesterday, because lacking behind is not a possibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. You know, it's funny, the doctor made a good point about identity and blockchain, and I don't know if any of you saw this, but I had a Powerball winner last January win $490 million, and they sued me to stay anonymous. And it was funny, so this lawsuit went on for weeks and weeks, and the number of emails I got saying that everyone knew she was a woman that won, that they would take her place for $1 million or $2 million so that she could claim anonymously, and even the number of men who were willing to go through sexual reassignment for $400 million would shock you. Email and voicemail and letters saying, no, it's okay, I know I'm a guy now, but I'll be a girl for the purposes of claiming the prize, so that the woman who wants to be anonymous can stay anonymous was remarkable. Anyway, so all kidding aside. Our next presenter comes from UBS. He's been focusing on digital technology, digital identification, and artificial intelligence. He's previously done significant work in distributed ledger technologies. Peter Ivankeg.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I start the basic slides and everything, I'm actually a very quick introduction. UBS is a wealth manager in Switzerland. That's the only thing you basically need to know about that. And I'm kind of the only guy who's not in the industry right now. But let's see what I can tell you a little bit. And I actually like to take up on that and start with a story right here. I know you've all heard Don Tapscott today. Who hasn't? Who wasn't here during the blockchain? Everyone. There were probably more people in the audience back then. But there's one story actually that I think kind of illustrates the whole workings in the best way, and also a little bit the regulation that surrounds it. And this story starts with David Schreem, who he was a guy in the US who had a Bitcoin exchange basically back then. So he's exchanging Bitcoin for US dollars. And the business back in 2011 was already booming. So we had some kind of, let's say, hypes back then already. And what this guy did was pretty cool. So he built up his company, was 40 people kind of at the peak. And he was traveling all around the world, obviously, for business. But one thing that happened to him is pretty unfortunate. He was traveling back from Europe and to JFK. And at JFK, it wasn't his family that was waiting for him, but the FBI. So guy got pulled into prison, and in prison, something interesting happened to him. But first, the simple reason why this guy got put into prison was because he was taking money from people who didn't kind of earn it the right way. So the Bitcoin that came into his exchange came from an online platform called Silk Road. Does someone know Silk Road? It's basically like eBay, just for drugs. So not the best place to kind of get your Bitcoin from. For that, he was put into prison. But that's actually where the story gets interesting, because the guy saw that in prison, people are exchanging values between each other. And for that, they used cigarettes back then. And that's okay, but it's really not the most perfect solution, because sometimes you just smoke the cigarette, sometimes the ward would just take away the cigarette, or something like that would happen. So what the guy said is, okay, why don't you then simply use someone who has a notebook and writes down all the transactions that are happening? And that would be something like a bank. So they took that, they had one guy who was writing down the transactions, but it didn't really work, because that one guy wrote down hundreds of transactions that actually didn't happen. That's because you don't really trust people in prison, I guess. So what's the solution? You're in an environment where you don't trust people, you don't know them really, but you still want to kind of enable transactions to happen. And that's the same space we're in when we're talking about blockchain, basically. So what this David Schreem proposed then as a next step was, okay, let's not just have one person who has this notebook, but let's have multiple people who have notebooks and are writing down the transactions. And through that, these guys actually have to check with each other whether the transactions that they're writing down are correct or not. So you give a certain amount of transparency between these people, and they can't cheat. So whenever you have a transaction now in prison, you can actually just go to these guys, tell all of them the same transaction, and in the end, if one of them cheats, the rest will know. So you actually established a system in prison based on something where you don't have to trust anyone. And that's basically what the blockchain does on the internet. And he got 2 more years for that in prison, unfortunately, but anyway. Now, if we get started on this, actually, the thing that we're not going to talk about today, or at least what doesn't concern enterprises, because I think there's a big difference between public blockchains like Bitcoin, etc., and stuff that corporations work on, something that we as UBS worked on. Usually, you talk about public blockchains. That's what the news and the media basically talks about. But when you're actually developing solutions for the enterprise, you work with hybrid or private blockchains. The difference there is that you kind of trust the people that you're interacting with. So you're not in a prison-like environment in that sense. You do assume that the banks know each other, that the lotteries know each other, and kind of trust each other. So there's other parts that you have to solve. Now, what you solve there, and this becomes more and more important, if you move away from the simple kind of use it as a certain currency aspect and get into more of these, okay, I actually want to replace an IT infrastructure with this, smart contracts become key. And smart contracts are super easy. They're basically just pieces of code. And any logic, any business logic that you have, you can code into these contracts, and you can manipulate the underlying blockchain, the database, any way you want. So you can enable quite sophisticated and complex business solutions. Now, we started off as UBS, and this is the part, and I'm going to talk quickly about this, and then I'm going to tell you what we learn, because I think that's more and more important, because people heard a lot about what blockchain does, what it is, etc. But like, why doesn't it work the way you think it will? That's the important part. Now, we started off as a bank, basically, first thing we did, okay, let's do a bond. We basically created a bond on the blockchain. That was the smart bond, and it was awesome because everything happened automatically, autonomously. You had real-time transactions, etc., etc. Everything that you talk about when you talk about blockchain. But you still have one problem. All of these things happen on the blockchain. And whenever you wanted to kind of settle these transactions, you still had to go into the fiat world, you still had to go into the traditional system, so there you had the problem. For that, we went into our second use case, now a little bit more, with a little bit more knowledge, and that was the utility settlement coin. And the utility settlement coin is so easy that it's basically a joke that we still don't have it live, but what it does is you simply put fiat money, so your dollars, your pounds, your Swiss francs, whatever you have, onto the blockchain so that you can map it one-to-one and do the settlement on the blockchain so that with the smart bond, I don't always have to go to the traditional system anymore. That's a really, really important part. And even when you try to implement blockchain technologies in the future, this is something that you always have to keep in mind. Because if you don't solve this problem, then forget about the whole thing. Third part is identity, and as she mentioned already, identity is super important. You can't just do transactions with people you don't know. So for that, we kind of developed the so-called digital wealth passport, where you could create a blockchain-based identity, bring that from bank to bank, and have all the KYC, all the anti-money laundering information. KYC is know your customer, information available and portable in a decentralized way. And finally, we also created, as we're kind of Swiss, we're not German, but we created a payment system for autonomous cars as well, together with BMW and one of their car parts manufacturers. Now, without knowing too much about these use cases, because I didn't tell you much about it, the important parts are these. And this is what you can learn about them for yourselves. The first part is ecosystems. One thing that keeps happening and that people don't realize is that when you try blockchain technologies, you always have to work together with someone. And it's usually not just one other entity, but it's usually 20, 30, however many other entities. Because otherwise, the benefits don't really pay off. Because if you're implementing a blockchain for yourself in your own company, don't do that. Use a normal database, something else. But it doesn't really make sense. So you always have to think in terms of ecosystems in order to make it work. Can be network effects, can be anything else. The second part is scalability. And scalability usually in this context says that there's not enough transactions yet you can do on the blockchain, etc., etc. But that's not even the most important part. Because yes, with Bitcoin, you can basically do 7 transactions per second, which makes it basically useless for anything that it was invented to do. But private, enterprise-grade blockchains don't necessarily have that problem anymore. They have 2 others. One is financial scalability. It becomes really, really, really expensive when we want to run them in a live environment with as many people as you have with all of your clients. So that's something to always keep in mind. The other part is knowledge scalability. Try to find enough blockchain developers that are going to work for you. In Switzerland, you can kind of do it, but it's super hard to do it anywhere else. And even in Switzerland, it's super hard. One of the best jobs these days is being a blockchain developer, by the way. That's the scalability part. We have another part that's data protection. And data protection, I don't know how many of you are based in the EU or have EU customers, but we have this beautiful thing called the Global Data Protection Regulation these days, where one of the things that it does is, if you don't interact with the client anymore, but you have some information of him, he can ask you to delete that information. Just as easy as that. So you, for example, can delete your Facebook account after 5 years of inactivity. The problem here is that if you created a blockchain-based system, and blockchains work in a way in which everything that you once included in a blockchain cannot be changed anymore, which means that you cannot just delete information that you have previously put on there. So try to comply with the regulation in that case. One problem that you have to solve. The other one is governance. Governance in that sense is not regulation, but governance is try to get 10 banks was in our case, but I guess with lotteries is not much easier either. Try to get 10 lotteries to agree on a process, on a standard, on everything, and going forward for the next 20, 30 years on the update cycles of the software, on everything else, and then implement that. That's a pretty big deal, and the hardest work that we've done with these projects is always aligning with all the other players in the ecosystem to get to a common standard. You wouldn't think how much work that really is. And the last part is a funny part, and that concerns smart contracts. Smart contracts are, as the name says, smart contracts, yes. But they're neither smart nor are they really contracts. That's the one problem with them, despite their great name. They're not really smart because the only thing they can do is handle situations which are pre-coded into blockchain. So whenever they see whenever something happens that's not included in the contract, it can't really do anything with it. So that's something you always have to keep in mind. The other part is they're not necessarily always contracts. When you get into autonomous payments, for example, sometimes it's not enough anymore to have just automatically these payments happen because it's not legal in that sense. I can tell you more about that. But this is the little shortcoming. And then the third part, whenever you have these smart contracts, you really have to make it bulletproof, because one thing that happened is some guys that created a so-called fund that was based on the blockchain, got 150 million together, which back in those days was actually a lot of money. Now it wouldn't be anything in a blockchain world, but gathered 150 million, and there was one clever hacker who saw a problem with the smart contract, and 50 million of the fund was gone. Just like that. And in this world, code is king, so when those 50 million are gone, they're gone. There's no one who can change that. So that's a big problem, and that's something you have to keep in mind as well. So these are just kind of 5 areas that when you think about implementation, you have to answer the questions there first, and then you can really commence with this. And it might be a little bit playing the bad guy compared to Don Tapscott, but I think this is important when you think about the use cases, and this is basically what I want you to remember from this little presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I really like to thank you. I appreciate I have a 13-year-old son who's a computer hacker. And I've been looking for a job for him to go into, and now I know it's blockchain technology development.
It is.
He's a robotics whiz, and so I missed his tournament this weekend to be here, and he's in the state finals now, and so I know his career path. So I appreciate that. Next speaker is from Lottomatica, Italy. He's the IT architecture lead for that very large and well-respected company in our business, and has been there since 2012. He, prior to that, was with Accenture, developing architecture for IT and data systems at very high levels. So please welcome Carmine Tufano, please.
Hi everyone. I try to answer to that question. If it's now the moment to see on blockchain for lotteries as us, and looking inside to the cybersecurity aspects. So everyone now is speaking about blockchain. Everyone is investing in blockchain, and this is reflecting that now the blockchain is generating much hype respect to all of the other technologies. In this slide, the IDC report that by 2022, the blockchain worldwide spending will be around about $12 billion. And looking also in the long term, by 2030, it's expected to grow at something like $3 trillion But this will be across some phases. The first phase that is the current phase is something that I can synthesize as irrational exuberance, because we are using blockchain for everything. My friend opened a restaurant based on blockchain. I don't know how. So this period, we hope will end in a few months, but it's expected to go through 2021. The second phase will be maybe the core of this huge transformation, where the large focus investment will be on blockchain, and so there will be a lot of cases that unleash this type of technology. At the end, the main benefits are expected to be unleashed by starting from 2027. So a lot of time. Now, in 2018, main adoption are related to financial sector and distributing services and manufacturing and resource. For the financial sector is in part related to the cryptocurrency, in other part related to the real value that the blockchain is exploiting now. So the speed, the transparency, the reduction of settlement time, and so on. About the distribution and manufacturing is mainly related to the tracking of information, of assets, of its evolution within a supply chain. So, let's get why there is this interest on this technology. Starting from this morning, I think all of us already get how it works. And mainly, before this technology, if two people engage in a transaction, they have to rely on a third party. This third party could be a bank, could be an institute, could be something. In the future, with blockchain, these two parties could have their transaction without relying on a specific, on a central party. And so, leveraging on the famous ledger, the blockchain. So, three main concepts are behind this technology. The distributed ledger, where all people can participate to this network, can copy the transaction, and can ensure that all information stored within this blockchain is true, is not manipulated, alterated, or so on. There is a mechanism for consensus, and also, as we already said, about the smart contract. So we can instruct the blockchain to validate the information that we distribute across it. I can skip this because I think we already know about this benefit. And so the question now is the blockchain technology our best bet? Thinking about the cybersecurity is a quite complex discipline. But I synthesize in 5 main pillars. One is the cyber risk management. One is to secure the information. And the other pillars are related to the detect, the prevent potential threats, and to respond to potential threats. The blockchain at the current state could be adopted, the focus is on the secure stage. Because basically, if you have some information to protect, you can leverage on blockchain. And so you can also influence the other two areas of processes because you have to change it. Basically, if you distribute your information across a wide network, your detection policies will change. Maybe you will benefit in prevention because maybe you don't have to do nothing in relationship to the security information management. So, thinking about a gaming operator, basically we collect transaction. We collect transaction through a lot of channels, and we store all of these transactions with our central systems. These central systems are made with several components, and so each of these components could be an entry point for a hacker that could attempt to modify some information about transaction. So could modify some numbers if after the draw, for example. And so we have to take care about the availability of this information that are the number, the transaction, and so on, the integrity, the immutability, the transparency of this. Then this with the blockchain could be simplified, of course. If we put all of this information on a blockchain, we benefit in terms of more secured processes that allow us to increase our level of data protection. Then in Lottomatica, we are going to use blockchain. We use it for the ticket digitalization. Nowadays, if you'd like to participate to one lottery, you go in our point of sale, get a paper ticket, and go out. Tomorrow, with blockchain, ensuring the anonymity of the customer and ensuring also the security that now that level of security is on the paper, on the receipt, that is quite similar to a banknotes, we are able to digitalize that piece of paper and to keep all information, to manage it during all its life cycle. Then another case could be, as already introduced before, the customer identification governance. Because as already my colleagues before introduced in the other speeches, if we share the information about our customer, maybe our know your customer processes, so our onboarding process could benefit. Basically, how it works. A customer provides us his data, his ID, we have to check. And so all of this data we can put on a blockchain, generating a sort of fingerprint, of digital fingerprint of the customer in that time. If the customer in the future changes something, we will add some additional info to this blockchain. And if our AML department would like to know all the history about the customer, could access to blockchain and access to all the changes that the customer does on his entity. So, this is the question that I repeat to myself basically once per month. And the answer is that it depends. It depends by the state of art of our enterprise, of our services, and so on. Basically, if you need to start from the scratch, maybe it could be useful. Maybe it could be also cost effective. But if you have something already in place, changing everything at this moment, maybe it's not so simple and also useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I wanted to hit on a point and a question for the three of you, which resonates with me both as a regulator and operator of gaming. And to your point, Leah, about Switzerland taking 7 years to figure out something, I can suggest to you that the law in New Hampshire related to lotteries was written in 1964 and reflects 1964 logic and the like. And I can suggest also that every US-based lottery reflects the time at which that lottery was enacted and the thinking behind it. And I can tell you for sure blockchain isn't even a thought process. So I guess the question I ask you is, what would you suggest would be something lotteries, states, regulators could think about now in order to prepare for blockchain when it indeed comes to be a real thing in 5 years, like Carmen was suggesting? I know we just asked you, how, the meaning of life, but, certainly just think about it.
No, I think what is really important with that question is that, as we saw it also with the internet case, right? So the lottery law in Switzerland at the moment is from 1923. It's even older than your law. So internet, that was far from being developed, and also other technologies. But I think from that we should learn, and I think as we are in a very fast-moving environment with a regulation that is always a bit lacking behind. I think as an operator, a regulator, it actually gives a very interesting situation of rethinking some models. Because as you are as the roles are maybe linked or even interchangeable, it also gives you maybe more liberty to change or to move things. Mm-hmm. But it all depends about, so gambling regulation is state-based. There is no one-fits-all model for mm-hmm. all. And we had countries that were trying to copy one regulation implemented in their context, and it didn't work at all. So I think you always have to think about your environment, but with the blockchain, because it's early and as regulations are slow, it is better to start thinking about it now if it is something that we want to integrate, especially also because it has really the risk of creating that unlevel playing field we also had with the internet. Mm-hmm. So I think it's better to start now and to act and to at least think about these kind of questions. I mean,
to that point, Peter, so suggesting, like, I wasn't thinking about blockchain 3 years ago, 2 years ago. I guess, if, in the sense that changing regulations take so long, what should we be thinking about as operators, regulators, to change in terms of language or thought process or just logic, mm-hmm. to sort of see down the road to what will be next? Any thoughts on that?
I think from our standpoint, for example, it's not necessarily what you should think about alone, but what you should think about together with the lottery operators. At least that was with banks as well. Like, kind of, it's a process together, because as a regulator, you don't need to think about the use cases a bank or a lottery wants to use the blockchain. It's always like, think about it together. And the first thing, before thinking about blockchain, get your digitization ready.
Sure.
Because that's the bigger problem usually. Like, most of the stuff that you can get from blockchain, you can get from a traditional technology. If you do an end-to-end process digitization, that usually helps. Okay. That would be my 2 cents.
And Carmen, to that point, I see you're very forward-thinking in terms of what you think down the road, or as I always suggest to my staff, see 3 moves down the board. Don't see the move in front of you. See how that affects the next move and the next move and the next move. And since you're in the business, what would you suggest in terms of how we should be thinking as an industry, obviously collaborating through regional organizations, North America, Latin America, Europe, and the rest, and Asia. What thoughts would you have in that sort of forward-thinking context about blockchain specifically, but also emerging technologies we haven't even thought of yet?
Yes, collaboration maybe around the world, it's not so simple. It's not so simple for some regulation,
Yeah.
data protection for our European operators. And I think it's, in terms of customer identity, it's also not useful because mainly our businesses are locally. So people can play only in his country. So I think a collaboration from a technology perspective, so implementing something that is not strictly related to the business, but is related only to the data. Anonymization, that's data. Maybe it could be useful. And maybe it could be also feasible at the current state.
I guess certainly the first question would be the anonymity of the technology and the really move to digitization of play in terms of lottery. The lack of a physical ticket is almost generational, if you think about it, for our player base, that my mom still wants a ticket, and my niece, who I give money to every so often, and I hand her cash, and she's like, oh, Uncle Charles, isn't that quaint? You know, you still use cash. I don't use Venmo, I don't use, PayPal and the rest. I guess my question is, for the purposes of security and the physical ticket, what is the best way to explain that to somebody who doesn't understand technology very well? I don't know, Leah, you gave it a look. So would you like to answer that, or you understand what I'm saying? In the sense of the anonymity of blockchain is what everyone fears, even though existing technology and lottery, they are anonymous to us, right? The player walks in a store, buys a ticket, we don't see them. If they register, New Hampshire has an internet program. We know who they are. They have to register with our database. They have to self-identify. They have to go through ideology and geo-comply in terms of gate fencing. So I guess the question would be, is there a way to explain how anonymity is not necessarily a bad thing and sort of group participation and group checking is positive? Peter?
I think the easiest way to explain it is if you say that it's really just, with the blockchain you can do it that just the name or his identity is, for example, unknown, but what we did as well is all the attributes that are important so that he is located in the right place, he's old enough, what else is relevant, that can all be traced. So it's basically like using cash, but still better. It's way more anonymous, it's more secure than if you'd really have that physical ticket.
Okay. Carmine, you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
this is exactly what we did with our proof of concept that we are developing in Italy. Because in Italy, the customers are able to play without an identity, without a gaming account on the retail. And so the problem was how can I digitalize something that is strictly like banknotes on a smartphone, providing all the security constraints, all the security measures of banknotes. And so for this reason, we choose this type of technology.
I had the misfortune of being the head of the legal for the US-based lotteries for Powerball. More importantly, Hot Lotto. I was the game group chair when an employee of ours went rogue and installed a rootkit on an RNG and stole or tried to steal $14.3 million for the Hot Lotto drawing. So we learned a valuable and expensive lesson as a group in terms of fixing our IT infrastructure. I guess in terms of cybersecurity, because that is one of the points we should be talking about, and I laugh because the closest somebody came to breaking the New Hampshire lottery was an email was sent to my CFO, ostensibly from me with my information, saying, please send me the bank routing information and account number for our checking account. This actually happened. And it was addressed, and the name I used was Cynthia, her name was Cynthia, and I never called her that. I always called her Cindy. So she knew immediately it wasn't from me, it was from somebody else. that was an attempt at hacking our bank account. So in terms of cybersecurity layer, what would you suggest for blockchain adoption or anything that a lottery operator regulator can do to be prepared for that?
But I think it comes back to what you mentioned, right? That with the smart contract, that your smart contract is only as smart as the people developing the smart contract,
Yeah.
right? So,
I laugh as a lawyer because I've written great contracts and terrible ones. So yeah.
so be very aware on how you construct your blockchain and the smart contract behind. And that's also where I think from the regulatory point of view, it will be a challenge to convince regulators which have not a lot of knowledge about these technologies to actually be accepting games that are encrypted on a blockchain, because yes, we say it's very secure and it's transparent, but someone is actually writing and is encrypting these things, and you have to build a trust for that person. So
It's funny, when you were describing that, Peter, it reminded me of sort of almost the best regulators of poker are when you have 6 players who don't know each other playing against each other. There's sort of a group mentality of, I'm watching you, you're watching me, I'm watching him, we're watching each other. And so it struck me as sort of as a digitized version of, and this is very simple, and like I said, I went to law school, so I apologize. This come across as simple, but it struck me as that was the same logic, that we're all checking each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of it, and that's how you can also leverage it then between organizations. That's how you make it secure in this. And I always say that the funny part is, like, the system itself is never going to break. You can't hack it. But everything that's connecting to the system, the people, the interfaces, the whatever, that you can hack quite easily. And that's the normal, usual cybersecurity threats. And
Yeah.
social hacking is the thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for us, it's always people. It's never the system. It's always the individuals. Where, when you give a motivation to somebody and the access, you'll see, when people hit money, it's the problem. Certainly, in my experience, both as a regulator, operator, but also in my background, I was an organized crime prosecutor, so I used to see criminals all the time, and what makes folks turn is independent, is a single factor for everybody. We only have a few minutes left. I see a bunch of folks in the audience. Does anybody have any questions for this exceptionally talented, smart, enlightened panel? Can we get that microphone?
Or just shout.
Oh, you just shout, yeah. Again, yeah. Okay, maybe the folks in the back in here.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Yeah, this question is for all panels. And just question about the delegate, was that DPoS, delegate?
Delegated proof of stake.
Proof of stake, that's right. Is that because the blockchain inherent the scalability and performance issue, do you think that DPoS will solve that? Or what do you think?
Not entirely, in my opinion. I've been looking into that, and he's talking about the consensus algorithm
That's right.
that is not even that what's used with Bitcoin, not what's used with, so it's a kind of forward-looking one.
Yeah.
That one doesn't have huge scalability issues, but it still has scalability issues, even with the delegation in it. And another part that is super hard to solve is the governance of the
super nodes, right?
I think it will be more hybrid. That will be one part of it, but I think we'll go into other directions. But a little bit hash graph, maybe you've heard about that, in that direction. I'm still not sure what it's going to be, though.
I see. But if the super nodes are all lotteries, then could that be a possibility?
Absolutely. You have to look at with virtual machines. There's a really good LinkedIn article from one of my colleagues who wrote about that, who has a pretty good solution to that. I'll send you you can.
Okay.
Great question. Any other questions we have? And this is your chance now.
Sorry.
Speak now, if ever hold your peace. At least that's what I was told. Okay, 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes left. Any parting thoughts for our colleagues and friends in the lottery industry, and particularly me, who is completely clueless on this area?
Okay.
Carmen, why don't you start? You hadn't gone. You were up.
Sorry.
Any thoughts you want to sort of impart on this area or in this subject matter, or any final words?
No.
Peter?
I have one thing that when you hear blockchain, don't switch off your brain. Like, still think in the same things that you had until now. It's nothing super new. It's just, you know, keep your realistic view.
And I think it would, to add to that, also apply it to your context and to your regulation, because we are in a sensitive matter, and it's not easy to adopt it in our context. So be really smart about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always say that, you know, change is inevitable. Our acceptance of it is not, right? And certainly in my state house, the average age of the legislature is 72 years. And I'm really not kidding. Their average age is 72 years old. And you'll find that to be across the U.S. Change happens glacially. The problem is the rest of the world doesn't wait for that. And so I always say nature abhors a vacuum. And so that's why when we found states not going with the internet, private operators did, and then they provided that service to players in the U.S. So anyway, with that, I think that's our hour is up. Thank you for your time here and your attention and spending an hour with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.